Greetings Glazers! I'm going to show you in this video how I glazed my different salt and pepper shakers and their caddies, along with how you can cut your corks to fit your salt and pepper shakers, as well as a little bonus on how to braid a handle. So for my main set of salt and pepper shakers, I kept it very simple. And I just used underglazes with a clear coat on top that was then put at a low fire to keep those underglazes nice and bright. And you can see I did a layer of white under the area that was going to be my rainbows, and this keeps all those colors a lot brighter, having a white background to put on top. And just make sure that you're applying your underglazes on after the initial layers are dry. So you always want to apply at least 2 to 3 layers of your underglaze. This will create a more consistent color base. I didn't add a full 3 coats for my blue part because I wanted it to be a little wishy-washy. And then on top of all my colors, I did some outlines in black and white. But then everything's topped with the pink clear glaze, which you can purchase from Highwater or online, which is perfect glaze for doing low fire with the underglazes. And if you look closely on my salt shaker, even though that I did, I think it was a whole 3 coats of white, it still shows through a little bit of my clay body. So depending on what type of clay you're using, if you're using a darker clay body, mine's a mixed bag filled with lots of different clays. But if you're using a darker clay body and you really want it to be white, maybe think about using a decorating slip early on during the greenware stage, and that will set you up for more success later on. For this second caddy and set of shakers, I used the Cone 6 glazes along with some mason stains. You want to dip your piece in the glazes first and then add your mason stains on top, and I just dribbled kind of a variety of the colors of mason stains to kind of make a drippy rainbow. And I did 2 dips. I did 1 dip in the white and a dip on the bottom in lilac. And then for the salt and pepper shakers, I just used the gloss white and the umpire black. And for this third set, I used Cone 10 glazes along with mason stains and wax resist. All of these got dipped in a Shino first. Remember that rhyme? Shino first or be cursed. And then I added some wax resist decorations on different parts before dipping in my second color. For the caddy, the second color on top was copper red. On the bottom half, I had Ayumi. And then I added those same mason stains that I used in the Cone 6 caddy, but for this one, once it fires, the mason stains turn out a lot darker or disappear completely because we're going to a much higher temperature in the Cone 10. And for the salt and pepper shakers, I used the matte black and the waltz salt. Remember, when you're using that wax resist, it'll still sometimes leave little beads of glaze where you've waxed, and so you need to go in there with a little sponge to wick away that extra glaze, because once it goes into fire, it'll stay there. It is very important when you're glazing your salt and pepper shakers and you're dipping them in glazes that you plug the dispenser holes with a toothpick. My holes were a little bit big, and so I used some newspaper wrapped around my toothpick, and you just stuff those in your little salt and pepper shaker holes to prevent the glaze from seeping in there, because even the smallest amount will usually end up clogging your hole, and the only way to clean them up after it's been fired is to use a diamond-tipped drill bit to drill through the glaze. I also used some newspaper to plug up the bottom hole. If you're using tongs, this is a good idea for dipping. You can also just plug your finger in there and use that to dip your piece in and out of the glaze. You'll just get a little glaze on your hands, but that's nothing to cry about. So when it comes time to adding your cork to your piece, it is possible to purchase pre-made corks online, and you want to get those ahead of time so you can use them to size up the hole that you need for your piece. But for this, I am just using recycled wine corks that have been laying around the studio for a while. And you want to put these corks in some boiled water and sit for about 5 to 10 minutes before you start working on them. This will make them softer and easier to cut and a little less brittle and crumbly. And I don't need a ton. I'm using half of my cork. And then I'm just using a nice sharp X-Acto blade to cut the cork at an angle. So I want to make a little cone that's more narrow at one end and wider at the other. And I just slowly carve each of these corks down until they have a nice snug fit in my shaker. And I also want to check and make sure that it is not poking out the bottom too much. We have that recess in our clay as a space that that the cork can sit, and we can still pull it out, but we want to make sure that we cut our cork so it doesn't poke all the way out and make for a rocky bottom. And once I've got it sized down, I just use the rough surface of this wooden wear board to kind of sand down the edges and round them out. I made pretty angular cuts with my X-Acto, and I want it to be a nice round finish so it seals properly in my shaker bottom. And so I just use that to sand it down. You can also use some 220 grit sandpaper. Just make sure you're wearing a mask or doing that outside when using it. Last but not least, one of my designs, I made a handle out of some twine. So to do this, first of all, I had some holes that I carved into my clay slab where I wanted my handle to connect. And I've taken some twine and I've cut 4 pieces, which are about 5 times the length that I planned for the handle to be. It's always good to put a little extra. I actually ended up having to alter my knots a little bit to compensate for not using enough, so more is better whenever cutting off your twine, because if you end up short-handed, you'll have to do some weird shortcuts to extend it or just start over with longer twine. But I've taken my 4 pieces and I've threaded them through my first hole, and I've just made a loop. And now I'm going to use an extra piece of string that I've cut off. It's only about 6 inches in length, and I'm going to make a gathering knot to secure the loop. And I've pinched my loop of 4 pieces of string together with binder clip, and this is just to hold it together while I'm working on it. It'll make it a lot easier rather than trying to hold it together while I work. So it's pinched there with the binder clip, and then I take the tail of my extra piece of string and I line it up with my folded over 4 pieces of string, and I create a little loop. Holding the tail of my loop securely, I'll then use the longer tail end to start wrapping around all of the cords that are there. So it's the 4 cords folded in half plus my extra piece of string, and I'll wrap around about 7+ times to going towards the loop end of my string. And once I've got a couple wraps there, as many as I'm happy with, I can make it really long or I can make just a couple short. It's fine, it's up to you. Once I'm happy with my number of wraps, I'm going to take that long tail and string it through my loop. After that long string is through my loop, now I'm going to pull the opposite side, so my first little tail that's towards my binder clip that's hanging off, and I'm going to pull that, and it's going to bring my loop through my wrapped string and secure the loop along with the tail in the middle of that wrap. So now the little loop and tail end of the string is tucked in the wrap side. And once it's secure and tight in there, I can cut both little tail ends off. They're not necessary anymore. And I'll also cut off the excess from my 4 cords, not the long part that you're going to braid, but the short part. I definitely recommend practicing this knot a couple times. It can take a couple tries to get the hang of it. Once your string is secured, I'm going to do what's called a square knot. The way I do this is I separate my strings. I've got 2 in the middle and 1 on either side, and it helps me to kind of think of them as arms that are going across the body. So I take one arm and cross it in front, and then I take my other arm and cross it behind, and then they just kind of pull through each other's elbows. There are 2 variations to this, one in which it stays square and flat, and one where the cord starts to twist and make kind of a helix spiral. I'm trying to make a square knot, which means I want to be alternating which arm goes in front of my, if you want to call them legs or the body, the 2 strings in the middle. If you want it to twist, then you should always be placing the same arm over the front and the same arm over the back. This one I'm trying to keep it flat and square. Unfortunately, while I was making the tutorial, I kept forgetting which hand had gone in front, so I did end up with a couple little twists in there. But you can always undo it. I ended up just letting it be because it was very minor. It was every other one that I kind of forgot, and it still ends up being pretty flat. But just to reiterate, you're placing one arm over the front, and then your second arm laps over your first arm and then goes behind your 2 strings and then loops through the front through your first arm's elbow. If you are running into the same problem I did where I kept forgetting which arm I needed to put in front on my next loop, if you look at the little knot on the corner, whenever the knot is in front, that's the side that will go towards the back on your next knot. About halfway through making these knots, I'm checking and measuring to see how much more I need to make my handle, and I realized that I was running out of string, so my 2 arms on either side are getting shorter and shorter while my 2 middle strings are staying pretty long. So a little hack that I do is I flip the strings, so I make my 2 arms into my middle strings, and my middle strings kind of swing out to become my arms. And with this kind of fuzzy twine, you really don't notice this transition, but if you're using any kind of square cord or leather, you'll notice it a lot more. But for my purposes and for this string, it's okay to just kind of flip those around, and now I've got longer arms and a shorter middle legs, which will get me to the length that I need to make my handle. Once you've got your length for your handle, you can string through your end tail through your other hole in your clay and pinch that together so you can make another gathering knot. And it goes the same way where you're using a shorter piece of string. You make a loop, And then you wrap the long tail around that loop to create kind of a little turtleneck there. And then you take your long string and put it through that loop, and then pulling on the shorter tail from the opposite side, you're going to pull the loop through the little turtleneck and trap the knot in the middle. And then you can trim your excess string. And that is all for this video. Thank you everybody for watching. I look forward to seeing what you come up with. See you in the studio.